Hi everyone, it's Jen. I thought this week I would start by just kind of talking a little bit about my approach or my process, how I got started making this VN, and how I continue to work on its development. So I'm not a professional programmer. I have no formal training. I have no real prior experience to this. Take my approach for what it is, learn from my mistakes. I just thought maybe if anybody is just starting out a visual novel project and they're not really sure what to click on first, maybe they would gain some insight from me sharing my experience. So I did have this idea for a visual novel project for quite some time. It was in the back of my head. I knew I wanted to start with something that was going to be a smaller scale project. I was shooting for maybe around like 4 or 5 hours of playtime. I think the game is going to be longer than that. And it's grown in scope since I originally conceived it, but it's not going to be like one of those 50, 60 hour projects. Like, definitely not. Still going to be relatively short and sweet, which I think is a good place to start for a first game. When I was first thinking about my project, I had the idea for the story and the characters in my head. The characters and the world that the story takes place in was already established from like a comic series that I did many years ago that I never finished. So I knew I wanted to revisit these characters, reimagine the characters, but the world itself was going to stay relatively intact, so that I wouldn't have to do all the world building from scratch. Now, I think that as far as the actual game itself, it's got more of like a soft world building kind of feel to it. I don't really flesh out all the concrete details of all the world in an encyclopedic kind of way. But I think it's still important to kind of know yourself as the creator, what the world entails, like the details of the world, so that when there's an opportunity to put a little bit of flavor into the text or into the world, that's there. It should kind of speak for itself. I feel the same way about character development. I think that you can have a lot of background information about your character, planned out every single part of their life up until the part where they're introduced in the story. But it's unnecessary for the player to learn every part of that character's past. Just like you can have a relationship with a person and enjoy their company and not know every single little bit about them. I think it's more realistic in that respect. As long as they have a strong sense of agency and that their actions follow that agency, stay true to that agency, I think that you don't need to reveal things that often that character probably wouldn't naturally reveal. You don't need to put them in situations that tears open their traumatic past, the wounds from their traumatic past, when it wouldn't make sense for that character to put themselves in that situation. So, just stuff like that. Anyways, it helps having all these ideas, all these things fleshed out in your mind before you start even writing the project. So I have an advantage of already having established characters in a world to build my game around. So that part I didn't have to start coming up with from scratch. I started by making just this kind of document because I come from a comics background. I was thinking of it in the terms of making what they call a Bible for the story, or in comics, if you were trying to pitch your comic to a publisher. one way to do that is to create what they would call a story Bible, where you have just everything kind of like laid out. Yeah, so I made this document where I wrote out my goals. Some of these things have been scratched, like health. I ended up like having so little focus on health that I decided to like just take that stat out completely. But this was my initial thoughts for the game. These endings I was going to have more based on the characters playing their traits that they build. But even though these traits will affect the ending, the ending is now more affected by the companion relationship. That has the most effect on the ending, and then these are kind of more like secondary outcomes. Had a very brief, like one sentence outline of like the what the chapters were going to entail. Had brief just paragraph outlines for the characters, because again, I did already have them established in my mind. Some of the characters were reimagined, but I still had a clear idea of who they were. And then I just started laying out the scenes. Because my game is not kinetic, it's more like exploration based, where you have different locations that you can revisit. The labels or the progression are based more around the locations themselves and whatever key items or key triggers are in that location. So I introduce each scene by kind of like what the location is, what key items were in there, and like what kind of events what purpose that location had, what kind of events could unlock that would eventually move you on to the next chapter. And then that's how I basically kind of outlined it. Now, this is not a lot of writing, as you can see. I think this was, I only actually outlined up to, I did a brief synopsis of chapters 1 through 4, but like I really only did this kind of like outlining on this document for like the first chapter. And then once I started actually coding the game, I found it was just easier to make these kinds of notations in the program itself. So chapter 2, I don't have like that many notations, but you can see here how I kind of just ended up writing these on the locations themselves so that I wouldn't have to like go back and forth between documents. Like I've been trying to keep everything more or less into like one place, so that I don't have to keep juggling different programs and like going back and forth and copying and pasting a bunch of things. I actually find it a lot easier to work in a program like RenPy because of how I approach my game. I think that a lot of these visual novel engines that are coming out now, like the newer ones, are trying to like kind of push like, oh, this is codeless and it's easy. So if you're an artist or you're a writer and you don't know how to program, then this will be like the engine that you want to use because it's so much easier because you don't have to code anything. It sounds good as a sales pitch, but in actual execution, I think I'd be shooting myself in the foot if I had gone with one of those other programs, because one, you waste a lot of energy just learning how that specific engine works, and a lot of those like skills or those like understanding that particular engine is not going to carry over necessarily to another engine should you choose to switch. Two, because most of them are kind of small developers, there's not a lot of good documentation on them. So if you do want to actually stray from like whatever the engine itself can like kind of present to you when you first unpack it, unless you plan on having a really, really standard visual novel without deviating from like the template at all, like it's going to be kind of a struggle to like find the right documentation to make the kind of adjustments that you want to make. And I don't like having to like contact the developers directly and like wait for a response to see, how can I, change this little thing. Like RenPy is great because there's so much extensive documentation already out there. And because you can evoke Python, there's just a lot of things have not changed despite the engine having been around for like a really long time and gone through many different versions. Like the scripts are still going to work for the most part on the newer versions of RenPy as they did on the older versions of RenPy. They just seem like they do some streamlining to add some more short commands and stuff to make it easier, but like the old scripts still work. Like if you had to use Python before to to make a certain thing happen, like those scripts are still going to work. So I like that about it. And because my game has a lot of transitions, transitional effects, kind of switching with the animation, with that kind of like card flipping and the screens and everything. A lot of my code, I just end up copying and pasting these transitions and positions and everything. And a lot of these codeless interfaces where you have to like manage like drop down menus to have certain things flow a certain way, that to me just seems like it would be so much more tedious than just copying and pasting the code to have to sit there and like toggle through the drop down menus. Like I think you'll save yourself a lot of time in the long run to go with a more strict, for this type of a game, for a visual novel, if we go more of a script-based system. That, and it's so much more it's so much easier to organize the chapters because again, my chapters are all like location-based instead of being kinetic. It's so much easier for me to manage like the jumps between different labels and call statements where I might be triggering like a certain text and then I want it to go back to wherever the player was in the script. They may or may not trigger that text depending on like what variables have been flagged. So yeah, it's just been way easier to do it in RenPy, and I feel like you have a lot of room to grow in RenPy, and that growing pains is relatively small because there's so much documentation out there, and there's a really active community. So I would highly recommend using RenPy. So anyways, I did try a couple different engines before I settled on RenPy. RenPy was the first engine I chose, and then when I started thinking that I wanted to incorporate animation and I thought I might want to try to incorporate Live 2D, I did fight with Unity for a while before I realized I was just going to go back to RenPy and use the movie files instead of using Live 2D. One, because I tried using Cubism, and honestly I didn't really like Cubism that much compared to Anime Effects. They both have their pros and cons, but for the type of animation that I'm doing, Anime Effects is just much more streamlined and faster to create the assets I needed than setting it up in Cubism. So I did try a couple other engines besides that as well, which is why I'm talking about like the drop down menu type codeless interfaces. But to tell you the truth, I can't even remember the names of those engines because they just were, there was no real documentation on them, and I got fed up so quickly that I just moved on. So the main two ones that I really tried to spend a lot of time on was RenPy and Unity. So yeah, I think RenPy is a lot more beginner friendly for a visual novel. Like I did try a couple different assets in Unity that were built for making visual novels within Unity, but again, it just felt like it had a lot of that kind of drop-down interface, a lot of lack of documentation on those assets, and yeah, once I finally committed to RenPy, I've had no regrets. I'm really happy that I chose this engine. Okay, so after I chose my engine, after I had my outline, I script directly into RenPy. Once I have my general outline and my locations, and I know what needs to happen in every location, I just write it straight in RenPy. I have my my triggers or my conditionals at the top, that I have for my notations for what needs to happen, and then I just go from there. I know there's some people who suggest, especially if you're working in a team, to write out everything in advance, or have all the art assets first, or have all the to do it in a certain kind of A, B, and C kind of format. I guess as a solo developer, I just find it easier to work on whatever I feel like. So if I'm burnt out from writing, or I don't have the space to really focus on the dialogue, then I might just go in and try to bug test and put some little kind of optional banter in there, or I might work on an art asset or something. If I get my wrist gets tired from doing the art stuff, then I can go back to scripting. So yeah, I feel like I have a lot of freedom to kind of break up the tedium of working on a game. If I was forced to work in any one particular workflow, then I think it would get really tedious, or I could find myself more easily getting stuck on one aspect of the process. I don't know if this was helpful or not. Thanks for listening to my rambling. I think I'll probably just end it with that. If you have any questions, or if you'd like to look over any of my disorganized code, and I'm more than happy to share what I've learned, whether or not how I've accomplished something is the right way or a good way. I have no idea. It seems to be working. So I have at least that. So if you have any questions on how I coded any of my my movie sprites, or have any of the variables or stats have impact in the game, I'd be more than happy to discuss that or share anything that I've learned on my way. Thanks so much again for listening, and don't forget to enjoy the process. Bye.